Sarah returned after 3 weeks of being missing, intact and beautiful. Only her dog barked until its voice box tore and died as soon as she crossed the threshold. The heat in Oakhaven was unlike anywhere else. It wasn't just the temperature, it was a living object, an invisible weight pressing down on your chest, squeezing every drop of moisture out of your body until you felt like a piece of beef jerky forgotten on a truck hood. It was the kind of heat that melted asphalt and made mirages dance on the ground like beckoning ghosts. I'm Elias Thorne, and this private detective business taught me that in this town, where there are more bodies buried than gold, hope is the most luxurious and also the most dangerous thing. I sat in my old Ford, the air conditioner groaning like a dying animal, staring at a picture of Sarah Vance taped to the dashboard. 19 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a radiant cheerleader-style smile. The kind of smile that had never tasted the bitterness of life. Missing 21 days ago in the Red Rock Canyon Rim area. 21 days. In this Nevada desert, 3 days without water is a death sentence. 7 days is a miracle. 21 days, that's when you stop looking for a human being and start looking for wolf-dragged bone fragments. Sheriff Miller closed the case a week ago, calling it a regrettable climbing accident. But the Vances wouldn't accept it. They hired me, paying me a hefty sum just to turn over every damn rock in that canyon. I was planning to call Mr. Vance this morning to tell him I was quitting, that I didn't want to take their money anymore when the result was a big fat 0. But my phone rang first. "She's back, Elias. My God, the girl is back." Mr. Vance's voice broke over the speakerphone, distorted and raspy. I nearly dropped the burning cigarette onto my crotch. "Who's back? What the hell are you talking about?" I asked, squinting against the blinding sun. "Sarah. Sarah's at the front door. She walked home. She's alive." I hung up, a chill running down my spine despite the 40 degrees Celsius heat outside. No one walks out of Red Rock after 3 weeks and is intact enough to ring a doorbell. No one. Driving to the Vances' neighborhood took 15 minutes, but I felt like I was entering another world. This neighborhood was a symbol of fake American tranquility. Lush green lawns watered with expensive water, pristine white fences, and fluttering flags. But today, the air here was thick. There were police cars, ambulances, and dozens of neighbors gathered in front of house number 42. The whispers sounded like a beehive. I parked a block away, stepped out, and was immediately assaulted by the scorching heat. I adjusted the gun holster under my armpit, a professional habit whenever I felt something was wrong. And a lot of things were wrong. First was the silence of the birds. Oakhaven was usually noisy with crows. But today, the sky was empty. The trees stood perfectly still, not a breeze stirring them. I squeezed through the crowd into the front yard. Sheriff Miller was standing there, hands on his hips, dripping with sweat, a look of extreme confusion on his face. "Elias." He nodded a greeting, his voice hoarse. "You won't believe your eyes." "How is she?" I asked, looking toward the closed front door. "That's the problem." Miller lowered his voice, whispering as if afraid someone might hear. "She's perfect. Not a scratch, no sunburn. Clothes are a bit dirty. But, my God, she looks like she just came back from a walk in the park, not 3 weeks wandering in a canyon." I frowned. This defied all laws of biology. Just then, the front door opened. Mrs. Vance stepped out first, tears welling up, her hand tightly holding a girl's hand. And that was Sarah. I had looked at her photo hundreds of times over the past 3 weeks, memorizing every feature of that face. But seeing her in the flesh now made my stomach clench. Miller was right. She was too perfect. Sarah's skin was pale, not the healthy rosy kind, but the white of porcelain, of candle wax. Under this scorching sun, her skin should have been red or peeling. But no, it was smooth, strangely taut. Her blonde hair was glossy, sleek, as if it had just been meticulously brushed. But what made me shiver was the way she moved. Sarah stepped down the stairs. Each step was light, making no sound. Her head was held unnaturally straight, not wavering at all as she walked, as if her neck was locked onto an invisible axis. She smiled at the crowd, a radiant, standard smile, but it stayed fixed for too long. Her lips stretched wide to the sides, revealing perfectly white, even teeth, but her eyes, those blue eyes, were flat, unfocused, like 2 marbles soaked in cold water. "Thank you, everyone," Sarah's voice rang out. I held my breath. That voice. It was clear, sweet, exactly like the videos she posted on social media before she went missing. But something was wrong with the tone. It lacked the vibration of human breath. It sounded more like it was coming from a high-quality speaker hidden in her throat than from human vocal cords. Suddenly, a growl broke the strange atmosphere. It was Buster, the Vance's old golden retriever. This dog was famously gentle, had never barked at a stranger, and loved Sarah more than anything. But now Buster stood in the corner of the yard, fur bristling, baring its fangs, drool dripping down. It wasn't looking at Sarah like its owner. It was looking at her like a predator. "Buster! Quiet!" Mr. Vance shouted, trying to approach the dog. But Buster didn't listen. It started barking, frantic, panicked barking, mixed with a piercing shriek. It lunged toward Sarah, not in joy, but to attack. Its leash held it back, stretched to its limit. Sarah turned her head to look at the dog. Her neck rotated at such a smooth, fluid angle that I felt like I heard a faint click of a ball joint in a socket. She kept that same smile. Buster barked even more fiercely. Its barking tore at its throat, changing from a woof to a dull, blood-tinged choke. And then, right before the eyes of dozens of people, the dog collapsed. It convulsed violently, the whimper dying in its throat. Fresh blood streamed from its nose and mouth. It died instantly, its eyes still wide open, staring at its young owner. The crowd screamed in horror. "Mrs. Vance covered her mouth, sobbing. I looked at Sarah. In that moment of chaos, I swear I saw her smile twitch. Not fade away, but widen slightly. The corners of her mouth stretched, exceeding normal anatomical limits, almost touching her earlobes, before snapping back to their original position so fast I thought I was seeing things. "Poor Buster," Sarah said. Her voice was sad, but her face remained flat, like a dead lake's surface. He must have been too old. She walked toward the dog's corpse. Everyone seemed to instinctively step back, creating an empty circle around her. I closely watched her hand as she reached out to pet the body. Sarah's index finger. It was slightly longer than normal, and when she bent the finger, it didn't fold at the 3 joints like a normal person's. It curved like a pliable rubber band, soft and boneless. She touched the dog's fur, and I caught a strange smell on the hot breeze. It wasn't the Chanel perfume she usually wore. It was the sharp, sour stench of formaldehyde, the chemical used for embalming, mixed with the overpowering smell of bleach and the odor of damp earth. The smell of a basement that hadn't been opened for a long time. Sarah stood up, dusting off her hands. The gesture produced a dry, rustling sound, like 2 pieces of sandpaper rubbing together, even though she was wearing a silk dress. "I'm tired," she said to her parents. "I want to go inside." The Vances, still stunned by the dog's death but overjoyed by their daughter's return, quickly led her inside. The door closed, swallowing the girl's silhouette into the darkness of the house. I stood rooted to the spot, cold sweat running down my back despite the sun scorching my skin. Sheriff Miller walked toward me, his face pale. "What do you think, Elias? A miracle, right?" I lit a cigarette, my hand trembling slightly. The bitter smoke filled my lungs, calming me down a little. I looked at the corpse of Buster, the dog being carried away by animal control. The body was unnaturally stiff, as if it had been dead for hours, not just a few minutes ago. "A miracle?" I mumbled, my eyes fixed on the second-floor window of the Vance house, where the curtain had just subtly moved. "Miller, have you ever seen anyone walk for 3 weeks in the desert, and their shoe soles don't have a single scuff mark?" Miller looked bewildered. "What?" "Her shoe soles." I took a long drag of my cigarette, blowing the smoke into the hot air. The athletic shoes she was wearing. The soles were black and glossy, clean, as if they were just unboxed. No dust, no scratches, no cactus thorns stuck in them. I turned to look at the sheriff, my eyes dark. "She didn't walk home, Miller. She was placed there. Or—" I hesitated, recalling that oddly bending finger. She was assembled to walk home. I threw the cigarette on the ground, grinding it out with my heel. "Don't close the file yet," I said, then turned and walked toward my car. I have a feeling this disappearance was just the opening act. I started the car, and when I looked in the rearview mirror one last time, I saw Sarah standing by the upstairs bedroom window. She stood motionless, her hands pressed flat against the glass, and she didn't blink. Not even once. In the blinding Nevada sun, I felt an icy chill beginning to seep into every muscle fiber. Something had followed Sarah back from the canyon, or worse, what returned was not Sarah. I reviewed the footage at the police station. Sarah sat motionless for 4 hours, without blinking even once, as if her eyelids were afraid they would get stuck if they closed. The observation room at the Oak Haven police station was cold as a morgue, reeking of old coffee and the fatigue of night shifts. A two-way mirror separated our world from the interrogation room inside, a gray concrete box lit by flickering fluorescent lights, a cruel light that hid no flaws. But Sarah Vance, sitting there, had no flaws to hide. I stood with my arms crossed, leaning against the wall, my eyes glued to the black and white surveillance screen. Next to me, Sheriff Miller anxiously tapped his fingers on the table. "How long has it been?" I asked, my voice low. 4 hours and 15 minutes, Miller replied, without looking at me. "Since we brought her in for a formal statement, she said she was ready. She wants to help us figure out what happened. And what has she done in those 4 hours? Nothing." Miller rewound the tape. On the screen, time sped backward at a high rate. The numbers in the corner of the screen danced frantically. But Sarah's image? It was absolutely static. I narrowed my eyes, leaning closer to the screen. Normally, humans always have unconscious movements, scratching their nose, smoothing their hair, shifting their posture, or simply their chest rising and falling as they breathe. Sarah did not. She sat ramrod straight on the hard metal chair, her hands placed parallel on her lap, palms down. Her head was held at a perfect 90-degree angle to her shoulders, and those eyes— "She hasn't blinked," I whispered, feeling goosebumps run down my arms. "Miller, slow it down. Find me one instance of her blinking." Miller complied. We were glued to the screen for 10 minutes. Not once. The human cornea needs moisture. If you don't blink for a few minutes, you'll either cry or experience intense pain. Sarah had been sitting there for over 4 hours with her eyes wide open, dry, staring intently at the opposite wall, as if her eyelids were a superfluous decoration. Or worse, she was afraid if she closed them, they would be glued together by some kind of uncured adhesive. "Let me go in there," I said, pushing the door open. "Elias, take it easy," Miller called after me. "The girl just went through hell." "I'm not sure it was hell, Miller," I muttered to myself as I grasped the cold doorknob. "I think she just brought hell back with her." Stepping into the interrogation room, the first thing that hit my senses wasn't a sight, but a sound. Or rather, the lack of sound. The room was so quiet, I could hear the electric current buzzing in the light fixture above. Sarah sat there, her back to the two-way mirror. When I walked in, she didn't flinch. She rotated her head to look at me. Again, that head-turning motion. It was too smooth. No lag, no coordination with her shoulders or neck muscles. Simply the head rotating on the neck axis like a porcelain doll. "Detective Thorne," she said. I hadn't introduced myself. "Hello, Sarah." I pulled up a chair opposite her, trying to maintain the calmest expression possible. "How do you know my name?" "My parents said you were the one looking for me." She smiled. That smile, it appeared instantly, completely, with no transition from a neutral state to happy. It was like someone had just flipped a light switch. Click, and the smile was there. I placed my notebook on the table, observing her closely under the harsh light. Her makeup seemed a bit thick. At this range, I could see her pores, or what looked like pores. They were perfectly even, as if stamped out by a machine. "Tell me about the canyon, Sarah," I began, opening my pen cap. 3 weeks is a long time. "I got lost," she answered immediately. "I slipped. I fell into a cave. It was dark. What did you eat to survive?" "Bugs, tree roots, rainwater." I looked at her fingernails. Clean, neatly trimmed, no black dirt under the nails, which anyone digging up roots with their bare hands would have. "Sarah," I lowered my voice, leaning forward, invading her personal space to observe her reaction. "It didn't rain yesterday. Not last week either. For the past 3 weeks, Nevada has been as dry as an urn of ashes. Where did you get rainwater?" Sarah was silent. Her vacant blue eyes stared straight at me, unfaltering or flustered. She tilted her head to the side. and I swear I saw the skin on her neck crease like folded satin, not elastic like flesh. There was water in the cave, she said, but this time, something was off. Her mouth shape moved about half a second after the sound came out. There was water in the cave. The voice rang out first, then her lips moved to match, like an old film with out-of-sync audio. I shivered, trying not to stare at her mouth. Are you thirsty? I pushed the paper cup of water on the table toward her. Thank you, she said. This time the mouth and voice matched, but the tone changed. It was slightly deeper, as if her vocal cords had just been tightened by someone. Sarah reached out to take the water cup. I held my breath and watched. This was an unconscious reflex test. When holding a light, easily deformable object like a paper cup, the human brain automatically adjusts the force. Sarah took the cup. Her thumb pressed hard into the side of the cup, flattening it, and water spilled out, running down her pale hand. But she didn't react. No flinching, no letting go, no wincing at the cold water. She just raised the crumpled cup to her mouth, water dripping onto her dress. She tilted the cup to pour the water into her mouth. I heard a loud gulping sound, but I didn't see her Adam's apple move. The water seemed to fall straight down into a hollow tube, not passing through the esophageal muscles. Delicious, she said, placing the crumpled cup on the table. Water was still on the edge of her mouth, but she didn't lick it away. Her tongue lay still in her oral cavity, a dark red mass of flesh, looking dry. Sarah, I asked the question I feared most. In that cave, did you meet anyone? She stared at me. For the first time, the permanent smile disappeared. Her face went completely flat. They helped me, she whispered. Who are they? The Taylors, she said, her voice so low I had to strain to hear. They said I was torn too much. They had to. Fix me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Fix you? You mean heal your injuries? Sarah didn't answer. She raised her hand to scratch her neck. Her fingernails scraped against the pale skin, and the sound that came out wasn't fingernails scratching flesh. Scratch. Scratch. It was the sound of metal scraping rough cloth. I looked closely at the spot she had scratched. The makeup peeled off a bit, revealing not blood or red flesh underneath, but a thin black thread line, meticulously stitched in a zigzag pattern. I jumped up, the chair crashing behind me. Detective? Sarah asked, her eyes still wide open. Why do you look scared? I'm beautifully fixed, right? I backed away toward the door, my hand unconsciously touching the gun at my hip. Survival instinct screamed at me to run out of this room immediately. The thing sitting in front of me was not Sarah Vance. It was a clumsy imitation, a puppet controlled by invisible strings. I need some air, I stammered, then rushed out of the room, slamming the door shut. Outside, Miller looked at me anxiously. Elias? What is it? What did she say? I didn't answer him. I ran straight into the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to wash away the feeling of disgust clinging to me. In the mirror, my face was pale. After calming down a little, I left the police station and drove straight to my office, home. I needed to find out. I needed to know what the hell the Taylors were. My office was flooded with books and old case files. I rummaged through documents about local history, the urban legends people often told tourists to scare them. I found a brittle old diary of a miner from the 1800s, discovered in a collapsed cave in Red Rock. I flipped through the yellowed pages, my hands trembling, and I found it. A paragraph scrawled in charcoal, the shaky handwriting of a person losing their mind. They have no skin, they are cold, they envy our warmth. Do not let them touch you. If they touch you, they will find the seams. They will unpick you and wear you like a Sunday coat. The stitcher is coming. I hear his scissors in the dark. I closed the diary, a wave of cold air running down my spine. My desk phone rang, breaking the silence. I picked it up. Thorne speaking. Elias, it's Miller. The sheriff's voice was shaky, full of panic. You have to come back here. Immediately. What is it? Did she confess? No. Miller swallowed, the gulping sound loud over the phone. We were about to take her home, but when she stood up... Elias, she left something on the chair. What did she leave? A toe, Miller whispered, his voice choked with horror. Her left pinky toe fell off onto the chair. And... Elias. It didn't bleed. It was hollow. Inside was only stuffed with human hair and teeth. I dropped the receiver. Outside my office window, night had fallen over Oakhaven. The streetlights began to flicker, and from afar, echoing from the direction of the Vance house, I heard dogs barking. No, not the Vance's dog. That one was dead. It was the dogs of the entire neighborhood. They were barking in unison, a chorus of fear, because Sarah had come home, and she was starting to fall apart. Sarah's mother said the girl had a very healthy appetite, but I smelled a strong stench of spoiled meat coming from the bathroom she had just exited, mixed with a strong bleach smell that made my eyes sting. I parked my old Ford 2 blocks away from the Vance house, under the shade of a gnarled old oak tree. Tonight, there was no moon. The darkness in Nevada was thick as crude oil, only torn by the sickly yellow light from the sparse street lamps. I turned off the engine, lowered the window slightly to let the cigarette smoke out, and raised my binoculars. The clock on the dashboard read 11:45 p.m. The Vance house was brightly lit. Every light in the house was on, as if they feared the darkness would swallow their daughter who had just returned from the dead. Through the first-floor dining room window, I saw a scene of family happiness so ridiculous it was unsettling. Mrs. Vance was ladling soup into a bowl. Mr. Vance was laughing and talking, gesturing wildly about something, and Sarah sat at the head of the table. At this distance, through the faint infrared lens of my old military binoculars, she looked normal. But that normal was what gave me the chills. She sat too straight. Her shoulders never slumped, even when relaxing. I watched them eat dinner. Or at least, I watched her parents eat. Sarah picked up a spoon. Her movements were jerky at the pause points. Lift up. Stop. Bring to mouth. Stop. Lower down. Stop. It was like a stop-motion cartoon with missing frames. She put the spoonful of soup into her mouth, but I didn't see her throat move to swallow. She simply poured the food inside. I lowered the binoculars, jotting notes into my notebook. Subject lacks natural swallowing reflex. High probability the esophagus is damaged or replaced. I remembered the toe that fell off at the police station. Hollow, stuffed with hair and teeth. If a toe was fake, what inside her was real? Suddenly, Sarah stood up. She walked quickly toward the kitchen. I saw Mrs. Vance following, her expression worried. I turned the focus knob of the binoculars, trying to look through the blurry kitchen window. Sarah was standing in front of the wide-open refrigerator. The cold light from the fridge shone on her pale face, highlighting her dark, sunken eye sockets. She was grabbing something from the freezer compartment. Raw meat. It was a slab of raw ground beef, still half frozen. Sarah didn't thaw it. She didn't cook it either. She put a whole handful of raw meat into her mouth, chewing greedily. Through the binoculars, I saw her lower jaw moving bizarrely. It didn't move up and down on a vertical axis. It slid sideways, like the jaw of a camel or a ruminant reptile. Her cheeks bulged, stretching so much I feared the skin on her face would rip. Snap. Crunch. I imagined the sound in my head. The sound of frozen meat being crushed between human teeth. Mrs. Vance entered the kitchen. She placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. Sarah turned back. Her mouth was full of beef and blood, dripping down her chin, onto her pristine white dress. But Mrs. Vance didn't scream. She did something that chilled me more than Sarah's action. She took a paper towel, gently wiped her daughter's mouth, smiling sweetly as if Sarah had just secretly eaten a cookie, not devoured raw meat. Denial, I whispered. They are denying reality. Sarah pushed her mother's hand away, walked quickly toward the back door, and went out to the garden. I threw down the notebook, opening the car door as quietly as possible. I needed a closer look. I needed proof. I crept through the hedges behind the houses. The night air was still scorching, but the scent in the air began to change as I approached the Vance's backyard. The faint jasmine smell of the wealthy neighborhood was gone. In its place was a strong, foul stench, clumsily masked. It was like the smell of a dead rat stuck in the wall for a few days, but someone had poured an entire can of Javel bleach over it to cover it up. The acrid smell of chlorine stung my nose, making my eyes water. But beneath the layer of chemical odor, the smell of rotting meat still lingered, sweet and nauseating. Sarah was sitting on the old wooden swing in the corner of the garden. I hid behind a dense oleander bush, less than 10 meters from her. My heart pounded against my ribs. At this range, I could hear sounds. She was doing something to her left arm. Under the dim light cast from the living room window, I saw Sarah holding a sharp, gleaming object, a needle, the curved kind used in surgery or for sewing burlap sacks. She stabbed the needle into her bicep. There was no cry of pain, only a dry SRRT sound as metal pierced the skin. She pulled a long black thread through. I narrowed my eyes. The skin on her bicep. It was loose. It didn't cling tightly to the muscle underneath. It sagged like an oversized sleeve. Sarah was sewing it back to fit. She executed the stitches skillfully, quickly. Stab down, pull up, tighten. Every time she tightened the thread, I heard a small creaking sound. The sound of dry skin rubbing against itself. Mom said I have to be pretty, Sarah muttered. Her voice now was no longer clear. It was husky, as if coming from an empty barrel. This skin is stretched. I have to take it in. I have to take it in before it comes to take it. Who is it? I accidentally stepped on a dry branch. Snap. The tiny sound echoed like a gunshot in the still night. Sarah stopped. The needle was still stuck halfway in her bicep. She didn't turn her head immediately. First, her left ear twitched, pointing toward my oleander bush like a cat's ear. Then, her upper body rotated 180 degrees backward, while her hips and legs still faced forward. I held my breath, gripping the .38 revolver in my jacket pocket. "Who's there?" Sarah asked. Her eyes in the dark did not reflect the light. They were pitch black, deep and bottomless like two empty holes. And then, she stood up. The way she stood up was an insult to anatomy. She didn't use her legs to push herself up. She seemed to be pulled up by an invisible string from the top of her head. Her legs stretched out, dangling for a second before touching the ground. She began to walk toward my bush. Her gait changed, no longer light and graceful like this morning. Now, she walked heavily, jerkily. Her right leg kicked up higher than necessary, then stomped hard on the ground. Thump, thump, thump. I backed away, trying not to make any noise, but the foul stench suddenly became overwhelmingly strong. Sarah opened her mouth, and from inside her mouth, not a tongue, but a tangled ball of black thread fell out, dangling from the edge of her lips. She used her hand to stuff it back into her throat, swallowing with a gulp. "Detective," she giggled. The laughter sounded like pebbles rattling in a tin can. "Are you looking for scraps?" I dropped too many. "I apologize." She knew I was here. I had no other choice. I stepped out of the bush, gun in hand but not aimed at her. I held up my badge, though I knew it was meaningless at this point. "Sarah," I said, my voice trying to remain calm. "You need medical help. Your arm." "It's fine." Sarah looked down at her arm, crisscrossed with black stitches, which oozed a cloudy yellow fluid instead of blood. "It's just a little loose. Do you have a needle?" I ran out of thread. She took one step closer. I took 2 steps back. "Don't come closer," I warned. "You smell so good." Sarah sniffed, her nostrils flaring but her facial muscles not moving. "The smell of sweat. The smell of life. Your skin. It looks like a perfect fit. It must be so warm." That sentence sent shivers down my spine. "They envy our warmth." The words from the diary. Suddenly, the motion sensor light in the neighbor's backyard turned on because a cat ran past. The light swept over Sarah for a second, and I saw it. Under the thin dress, on Sarah's abdomen, there was a movement. Not breathing. They were bulges, moving beneath her abdominal skin, as if dozens of mice were scrambling inside her abdomen, looking for a way out. The abdominal skin stretched taut, imprinting the shapes of hands, small faces. "What the hell?" I uttered. Sarah looked down at her abdomen, patting it as if comforting a naughty child. "Shh," she whispered to her writhing stomach. "Not yet. Not yet. We need more materials." She raised her head to look at me, her eyes filled with craving. "Do you want to come inside for dinner, detective? My parents are asleep. We could try on clothes." I turned and ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I'm an old-school private detective. I've faced cheating husbands with knives and drug lords with guns. But the thing standing in front of me was not human. It was a bag of skin filled with nightmares. I ran frantically through the backyards, jumping over wooden fences, scraping my hands and legs. Sarah's giggling chased after me, echoing in the dark night, sounding like metal scraping glass. "Don't run, Elias, your skin will tear." I burst onto the main road, scrambled into my car, started the engine, and sped away. My hands were shaking so much I almost couldn't hold the steering wheel. As the car sped off, I looked in the rearview mirror. Sarah had reached the curb. She stood under the sickly yellow streetlight. She raised both hands, gripping the sides of her cheeks, and pulled. The skin on her face stretched, separating from her skull by a wide gap, revealing a bloody red darkness underneath. She was trying to adjust her face for symmetry, like someone adjusting a crooked mask. I floored the gas pedal, leaving that monster in an angel's disguise behind. But the smell of bleach and rotting meat seemed to have permeated my clothes, my skin, impossible to wash off. And in my breast pocket, where I kept my pack of cigarettes, I felt something bulky. I reached in and pulled out an object. It was a roll of black thread, covered in a yellowish goo. When did she put it in my pocket? When I was hiding in the bush? Or had she been in my car before? I threw the spool of thread out the window, shouting a hopeless curse into the desert night. The cat-and-mouse game was over. Now, it was hunting time, and I was the prey. The old ranger's journal contained a single line, written in dried blood, scrawled across the yellowed page. "They are not born, they are patched together. Ranger Station No. 4 stood desolate amidst the sea of red sand, looking more like a dry skeleton than a building. The wood was rotten, the windows shattered open like blind eye sockets. This was where Ranger Jim, my only old friend in this town, used to work before he shot himself 2 years ago. The police called it depression. I knew Jim was never depressed. He was terrified. I broke the lock of the rusty filing cabinet with a crowbar. Dust flew everywhere, reeking of musty paper and dead mice. I needed to find out about the name The Skin Collector, or anything related to the insane myths Sarah was babbling about. I found Jim's duty journal tucked under the bottom of the cabinet. The first pages were mundane, reports of wildfires, lost tourists, petty theft. But further in, Jim's handwriting became increasingly shaky, panicked. October 12. Found the campsite of the missing climbing group. Tent was intact. Food was intact. But their clothes were unstitched. All the seams were neatly cut. Why would anyone unpick clothes piece by piece like that? November 15. Heard the sound of a sewing machine. In the middle of the canyon, a steady rattling sound echoing from the rock face. I'm going crazy. And the last page, the words written in dried reddish-brown liquid. They are not born, they are patched together. The stitcher needs new pieces. My skin is starting to itch. I slammed the book shut, my hand trembling violently. Jim knew, and his death wasn't suicide, but a desperate attempt to prevent himself from being turned into material. The emergency radio in my car, which I still habitually kept on to eavesdrop on police frequency, suddenly crackled to life. All units be advised. Body discovered at mile marker 8, Devil's Drop area. Climber. Condition. My God. Condition is very bad. Request forensics immediately. Devil's Drop. Only 2 miles from here. I tossed the journal onto the passenger seat, floored the gas, and sped toward the canyon. The crime scene was at the bottom of a narrow crevice, where the midday sun shone straight down, scorching everything. Sheriff Miller and 2 deputies were standing there, covering their mouths, their faces ashen. "Elias," Miller saw me, his voice trembling, devoid of any authority. "Don't come closer. You don't want to see this." "I've seen enough disgusting things, Miller." I pushed him aside, stepping past the yellow caution tape. The victim was a muscular man, wearing professional climbing gear. He lay on his back on the hot rock, but what made my stomach clench wasn't the death, but the lack. He hadn't been attacked by wild animals. There were no jagged claw marks. His face was gone, not smashed. His facial skin had been meticulously peeled off, from the hairline down to the chin, around both ears. The cut was unbelievably sharp and neat, exposing the red muscle tissue and the bright white teeth set in a perpetual grin toward the blue sky. I leaned closer, despite the strong smell of blood and the buzzing of flies. At the edge of the cut, where the skin met the raw flesh, I saw tiny, regular holes. Needle holes. Someone had tried a needle on his face before deciding to cut, or worse, had sewn something on and then removed it and taken it away. Look at his leg. A deputy was vomiting next to a cactus bush. I looked down. The victim's climbing pants were cut and torn at the right thigh, and the entire quadriceps muscle, the thickest, strongest part of the thigh, had been carved out. Again, the cuts were surgically perfect. The white femur bone was exposed, clean, with no muscle fibers remaining. A flash of realization struck my brain, so strong I staggered and almost fell. The image of Sarah last night came back to me. Her pale face, smooth and perfectly taut. Her full, strong thighs under the short dress as she walked with heavy thumps in the yard. "Oh my God," I whispered, covering my mouth to suppress the urge to vomit. This victim wasn't randomly killed. He was a spare parts warehouse. His face was the face Sarah was wearing. His thigh muscles were helping Sarah move that disjointed skeleton. Sarah didn't recover. She was replacing. She was a ship of Theseus, made of human flesh, gradually replacing every faulty part with fresh ones stolen from unfortunate living people. "Do we have an ID on the victim?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Mark Wilson," Miller replied, flipping open the victim's wallet. "Missing 2 days ago. 2 days. Exactly when Sarah began showing signs of falling apart and needing repairs." "Search around," I shouted, startling all the police officers. "Look for needles. Look for thread. Look for anything that doesn't belong to nature." I knelt down on the sand, frantically digging around the body, and I found it. Tucked away under the victim's heel was a tiny object, reflecting a deadly metallic gleam in the sun, a sack sewing needle, curved like a crescent. But the most terrifying thing was what was threaded through the eye of the needle. Not cotton thread, not fishing line. It was a tendon, a long, thin, tenacious, ivory-white human tendon, still stained with dried blood. The stitcher. I mumbled the name from Jim's diary. I stood up, gripping the needle so tightly it dug into my skin, but I didn't feel the pain. Fear had paralyzed my nerves. "Miller," I turned to look at the sheriff, my eyes blazing. "You have to arrest Sarah Vance. Right now. Don't let her near anyone. Don't let her be alone with anyone." "Why? What does she have to do with this?" Miller was bewildered. "She's not involved." I ground out each word, holding the needle with the human tendon up in front of him. "She's made from this. And Mark Wilson, here, is just a patch. She's not finished yet." Miller looked at me as if I were insane, but the fear in his eyes was real. Just then, Miller's phone rang. He answered, listened for a few seconds, and his face went white. "Elias," Miller stammered. "It's Mrs. Vance." "What did she say?" "She said, Sarah said she was hungry. Sarah wants to have a barbecue. And she can't find Mr. Vance." My heart skipped a beat. Mr. Vance. A big, portly man. Lots of skin. Lots of meat. "Go back now," I roared, running toward my car. "Go back, before she sews him onto herself." I started the engine, the Ford roaring like a wounded beast, speeding away in a cloud of red dust. Behind me, Red Rock Canyon stood tall, silent as a gigantic cemetery where the tailors were patiently waiting for their next customers. When Sarah raised her hand to smooth her hair, I heard the sound of cloth tearing, and then the entire patch of her scalp slid down her shoulder like a silk scarf, revealing not a skull underneath, but a writhing mass of black goo. My Ford roared, its tires crunching the gravel as I slammed on the brakes in front of the Vance house. The front door was wide open, swinging creakily in the hot afternoon wind. "Vance! Jonathan!" I yelled, pulling out my gun and rushing into the house, Miller close behind. The house was empty, but it wasn't silent. There was a sizzling sound coming from the kitchen. The aroma of grilled meat, cooked meat, assailed my nostrils, but instead of stimulating my appetite, it made my stomach churn, because mixed with the BBQ seasoning smell was the pungent odor of disinfectant and the strong stench of fresh, undried blood. On the dining table, a note was pinned down by a cleaver plunged into the oak surface. "We are going to the community church. Thanksgiving service for the miracle. Sarah wants everyone to see her new beauty." I looked at Miller. His face was as white as a sheet. "The church," Miller stammered. "The whole town. Everyone will be there. Pastor Thomas called every house." "It needs an audience," I growled, sweat running down my temples. "Or it needs a buffet." Oak Haven Community Church was an old wooden structure from the 19th century, with a tall steeple piercing the sky, which was turning a bruised purple. The parking lot was packed. Hundreds of townspeople were crowded inside. When Miller and I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped in, a wave of hot, humid air hit our faces. The church's air conditioning seemed to be broken. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, wax candles, and that smell, Sarah's smell. People were tightly packed in the pews. All eyes were directed toward the pulpit. And there, under the sickly yellow light of the chandeliers, Sarah Vance stood next to Pastor Thomas. She was brilliantly and terrifyingly beautiful. Sarah wore a pristine white, off-the-shoulder dress. Her glossy blonde hair was styled in an updo. She stood motionless, smiling at the crowd below. But from the back of the church, with my eyes that had witnessed too many horrors, I saw the anomaly. She looked bigger, not heavier, but wider. Her shoulders seemed a few inches broader than yesterday. Her left arm, the one I saw her sewing last night, now looked abnormally sinewy and bulky compared to her slender right arm. The skin there was taut, the color slightly darker than the rest of her body, and on that left bicep, just below the edge of her sleeve, I saw a small blue-black tattoo, an anchor. My knees almost buckled. I knew that tattoo. Jonathan Vance, Sarah's father, was a Navy veteran. He had an anchor tattoo on his right bicep. Sarah was wearing her father's arm. My God, Miller whispered beside me. He had realized it too. Jonathan. On the pulpit, Pastor Thomas was passionately preaching about God's miracle, about the return from the dead. His voice echoed, full of emotion. And the Lord has kept this lamb, bringing her back whole through the valley of the shadow of death. Stop! I yelled, trying to push through the crowd. That's not her! Get away from her! My shout silenced the entire church. Hundreds of eyes turned to look at me. Indignation was clear on their faces. They were absorbed in religious fervor, and I was the disruption. Detective Thorne. Pastor Thomas frowned. This is a sacred place. Please do not bring your madness in here. Sarah turned her head to look at me. Again, that smooth neck movement. Detective, her voice rang out through the microphone. It was no longer the voice of a 9-year-old girl. It was a chord. There was Sarah's clear tone, but underneath it was a deep male voice, Jonathan Vance's voice, and the hoarse, dull voice of someone else. Perhaps Mark Wilson. You're late, Sarah said, the smile widening to her earlobes. My dad is here too. He's very close to me. She raised her left arm, waving. The bulging muscles on the girl's arm looked grotesque. Everyone. I fired a warning shot into the air. Bang! The loud gunshot in the enclosed space made everyone scream and duck down. Get out of here now! Look closely at her. Look at her skin. The heat in the church seemed to intensify violently. Or perhaps, Sarah's glue was starting to melt. Sarah stood on the pulpit, seemingly confused by the gunshot. She raised her hand to her forehead, as if dizzy. It's hot, she mumbled into the microphone. A crackling sound came from the speaker. The skin is dry. Need more. Need more. And then, the moment happened. She raised her right hand to smooth her hair, which was falling down. Her long, pale fingers ran through the base of her hair. She pulled gently. Rip. A wet sound, like oiled silk tearing, echoed clearly in the frightened silence of the crowd. Sarah's hand didn't stop at her hair. It pulled the entire scalp with it. From her forehead, the tear ran down to the back of her neck. Her glossy blonde hair, along with the layer of her scalp, slid off her skull, plopping down onto her shoulder like a shawl, revealing underneath. There was no white skull, no gray brain. Beneath that mask of skin was a solid black, glossy mass, contracting and writhing like a tightly packed giant ball of worms. Black threads shot out from the black mass, trying to hold onto the fallen patch of skin, but it was too late. Gravity had won. Sarah Vance's beautiful face began to slide down. First, her forehead, shriveling like melting wax. Then her blue eyes, actually 2 polished gemstones, fell out of their sockets, clattering on the wooden floor. Her nose and mouth collapsed, sliding down to her chest, leaving a jet-black, slippery head, featureless, with only a gaping slit in the middle, exhaling a foul, hot vapor. The crowd's screams tore through the night. Chaos erupted. People trampled over each other to run toward the door. The church door was too small for the panicked stream of people. Save me! What the hell is that? On the pulpit, Pastor Thomas stood paralyzed, face to face with the monster. The thing that used to be Sarah was now standing there, shedding its human disguise. The white dress tore as the body underneath swelled. The seams burst, shooting out streams of yellowish, pus-like fluid. From within the girl's slender body, spindly, sharp auxiliary legs like spider legs but made of human bone, pierced through her rib cage and ribs. It was no longer Sarah. It was the Stitcher. Its jet-black head turned toward Pastor Thomas. The mouth slit gaped open, revealing hundreds of jagged sewing needles instead of teeth. Your skin. The husky voice resonated. No microphone needed. Your skin is too loose. But usable. It swung its left arm, Jonathan Vance's arm, grabbing the pastor's neck. Its strength was so immense that I heard the sound of his neck bones cracking immediately. Shoot it, Miller, shoot it! I roared, raising my gun and aiming straight at the black mass. Bang, bang, bang! 3 bullets lodged straight into its chest, but there was no blood. The bullets just plunged into the black mud-like mass and disappeared, like stones thrown into a mud pond. The entity turned to look at me. Though it had no eyes, I knew it was looking at me. It threw Pastor Thomas's body toward the crowd like a torn doll, then leaped onto the church ceiling. It clung to the rafters with its pointed, sharpened rib-bone claws, moving against gravity at breakneck speed. Yellowish fluid dripped from its body onto the screaming people below. Anyone touched by the fluid screamed in pain, their flesh beginning to bubble and melt as if splashed with acid. It wants to patch up, I yelled, pulling Miller back toward the side door. Don't let it touch you. It's looking for patches. From the ceiling, the Stitcher swooped down. It wasn't aiming for me. It was aiming for a young girl who had fallen in the aisle. It landed on the girl. Its auxiliary arms bristling with sewing needles began to work. Slice. Slice. The sound of metal cutting flesh rang out, overpowering the victim's screams. It was unpicking the girl. Right there. Grossly and brutally. It tore off a patch of the girl's thigh skin and applied it to the wound on its chest, where I had just shot. Black threads shot out from its body, automatically stitching the new skin patch onto the wound in a matter of seconds. Excellent. It groaned, a sick, satisfied moan. Fresh. Elastic. I furiously emptied the rest of my magazine, but it was useless. We couldn't kill it with bullets. Run, Elias! Miller grabbed my arm. We can't save her. We have to get out of here. I looked at the young girl struggling weakly under the grotesque body one last time, my heart heavy with helplessness. We rushed out the side door, leaving the hell on earth in the church behind. Outside, night had fully descended, but the darkness was no longer a safe place to hide. From inside the church, the sound of shattering glass rang out. The Stitcher had finished its appetizer. It was breaking the window to come out, and now, it no longer needed to pretend. It was hunting openly. To the car! I yelled. We have to lure it out of the residential area, lure it back to the canyon. How do we lure it? Miller ran, panting heavily. I felt my breast pocket, where the sticky black thread I had picked up last night still left a yellowish stain on the fabric. It marked me, I said, opening the car door. It wants me. It has wanted me since last night. My skin is a perfect fit for it. I started the engine, turning the headlights straight onto the monster, climbing down from the church steeple. It was huge, gaunt, patched together from dozens of different body parts, with a glossy black head reflecting the light. I honked the horn loudly. Hey, you piece of rag! I screamed through the window. Come and get this new jacket! The Stitcher turned its head. Its needle-filled mouth slit widened, emitting a piercing shriek that cracked my car's windshield. It lunged toward us. The race of death began. It doesn't run with its legs. It moves by throwing its body parts forward and dragging the rest of itself behind with the sound of bones breaking, creating a terrifying rhythm. Throw, drag, break. Throw, drag, break. The V8 engine of the Ford roared like a maddened beast, pushing the speedometer past 120 kilometers per hour on Main Street. Streetlights streaked past the windows like blurry comets. Beside me, Miller was gripping the door handle, his face white, his eyes fixed on the right rearview mirror. Where is it? Elias, where is it? Miller yelled, his voice strained with panic. I didn't dare look in the mirror. I kept my eyes on the black asphalt road ahead, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. "Don't look back!" I shouted. "Just know it's there!" But the sound wouldn't let us ignore it. Clack, clack, clack. It wasn't the sound of footsteps. It was the sound of sharp bone tips stabbing into the asphalt, mixed with the wet swoosh of raw flesh being dragged. It was chasing us, and it was faster than any bipedal creature. "It's on the roof!" Miller roared, pointing up above the shops along the street. I quickly glanced up. The Stitcher was moving across the rooftops of the old town buildings. It didn't run like a person, nor like an animal. It resembled a gigantic, black drop of mercury, constantly shifting its shape. Sometimes it curled up, rolling. Sometimes it unfolded into dozens of long limbs, grabbing onto chimneys, signs, then flinging itself across the space between buildings. Each time it landed, tiles and debris flew everywhere. "It's cutting us off!" I yelled, steering sharply to the left to avoid a streetlight it had just knocked down. The car tilted sharply to one side, the tires screeching loudly on the road, the smell of burning rubber stinging the air inside the cabin. We swerved into the oncoming lane. Luckily, the street was deserted. The entire town had hidden away behind locked doors. Bang! A loud noise echoed on the car roof. The ceiling dented right above Miller's head. It had jumped onto the car. "My God! It's up here! It's up here!" Miller drew his pistol, aimed straight at the car ceiling, and fired frantically. Bang! 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 Bullet holes appeared on the car roof, letting in the streetlights. But along with them, a black fluid dripped down, landing on Miller's jacket shoulder. It hissed. Miller's police jacket smoked, instantly melting. He screamed in pain, dropping his gun. "Shake it off!" Miller roared, clutching his bubbling shoulder. I slammed on the brakes, then the gas, swerving the car violently left and right. The car swayed fiercely. I heard the sound of claws scraping metal on the car roof, like someone was using a scalpel to dissect a tin can. It didn't fall off. It clung tightly to the car roof with its rib-bone claws driven through the sheet metal. Suddenly, the front windshield cracked. A hand. No, a cluster of fingers pierced through the car roof, right in front of my face. It wasn't a human hand. It was a bundle of 5, 6 index fingers stitched together into a hook with long, sharp fingernails. It fumbled, trying to grab the steering wheel. I pulled the hunting knife from my belt, plunging it into that cluster of fingers. A piercing shriek echoed, not from the car roof, but from inside my head. It was the resonant scream of dozens of souls imprisoned in that patched-up body. The fingerhook retracted. But just then, on the passenger side, the window shattered. "Elias!" Miller screamed one last time. Something like a frog's tongue, but made of slimy pink human intestines, shot in through the broken window. It wrapped tightly around Miller's neck. "No!" I let go of the steering wheel with one hand, grabbing Miller's shoulder. But the strength of that thing was absolute. It yanked hard. I heard Miller's spine snap, and then he was violently dragged out of the car window at 100 kilometers per hour. The sheriff's large body was squeezed through the narrow window frame. I heard his shoulder blades shatter, his rib cage crushed flat. He disappeared into the darkness outside, leaving only a shoe dropped on the car floor. "Miller!" I roared, tears and sweat blurring my vision. But I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I would be next. Miller had bought me time, even if only a few seconds. The weight on the car roof disappeared. It had jumped down to collect its trophy. I looked in the rearview mirror. Under the bright red taillights, I saw the Stitcher bending over Miller's mangled body in the middle of the road. It wasn't eating him. It was opening him up. It tore off the uniform jacket, using its needle fingers to stitch the mangled corpse onto its lower body. It was lengthening its legs to run faster. Disgust rose in my throat, but fear was greater. I floored the gas pedal. The destination was Red Rock Canyon. Only there, where the terrain was rugged and the old mines contained explosives, would I have a chance to destroy it. The city of Oakhaven faded behind. Houses became sparser. The streetlights vanished. Only the desert darkness and my 2 headlights cut through the night. I drove for about 3 miles before the car started acting up. The engine was scalding hot, the temperature gauge hitting the red line. The monster's jump earlier must have damaged the radiator. Cough, cough, hiss. Steam billowed from the hood. The car lurched and slowly died. I pounded the steering wheel. "No! Don't die now. Come on, you. The car coasted a few hundred more yards by inertia and then stopped completely in the deserted highway. All around was the deadly wilderness, only the sound of wind howling through the tumbleweeds. I grabbed the Winchester rifle from under the seat, slung the ammunition bag over my shoulder, and stepped out. Silence enveloped everything, but I knew it wouldn't last. I pressed my ear to the hot asphalt road. Thump, thump, thump. The ground vibrated slightly, a new rhythm, heavier, longer strides. It had attached Miller's legs. Now it was taller, taking longer strides. I ran. I ran into the darkness, heading toward the sheer cliff face of the canyon not far away. The faint crescent moon was the only light source. Sand slid under my feet. Cactus bushes tore my pants, pricking my skin, but I didn't feel the pain. I only felt the cold breath of death on the back of my neck. I ran for about 15 minutes before reaching the edge of Ghost Town, the abandoned gold mine area right at the canyon's entrance. The rotten wooden buildings leaned precariously like gigantic tombstones. Wind whistling through the gaps created a chilling sound. Elias. A call echoed from behind. Not a shout, but a whisper. Yet it was so clear as if the speaker was standing right next to my ear. I spun around, raising my gun. About 50 meters from me, the Stitcher stood on the crest of a sand dune. Its shape had changed horribly compared to when it was at the church. It was now nearly 3 meters tall. Its legs were long, extended by Miller's bulky legs in police trousers. The upper body was still a patchwork of skin fragments, but the face, it had put on a new face. Pastor Thomas's face. The old pastor's skin was stretched too tightly over the monster's oversized skull, making his mouth gape open to his ears, his eyes rolled back and white. Elias. Pastor Thomas's mouth moved, but the voice was a blend of Sarah and Miller. Why are you running? We only want to complete you. Go to hell. I pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through its shoulder, releasing a cloud of black dust. It staggered, but didn't fall. Bullets tear the cloth. It groaned, the tone accusatory. Have to sew it back. Takes too much time. It started rushing down the sand dune. This time, I clearly saw how it moved. It didn't use muscles. The black threads crisscrossing its body acted like winches. They automatically pulled taut, yanking its limbs forward. It was like a puppet pulling its own strings. I turned and ran into the abandoned mine area. I needed to find the old explosive shed that Jim had mentioned in his diary. You run too slow, its voice echoed, closer. Your skin is old, but it's okay. I'll iron it flat. I dashed into a dilapidated wooden building, the town's old saloon. The floorboards creaked under my feet. I kicked over a few rotten tables to barricade the door, though I knew it wouldn't do much good. I backed up behind the bar, breathing heavily, my heart pounding as if it would burst through my chest. The smell of rotten wood, dead mice, and the dust of time assaulted my nostrils. Outside, the heavy thump-thump footsteps stopped. Silence. The silence was more terrifying than any scream. I smell your fear, Elias, the voice came from the roof. It makes your skin taut. Good. Taut skin stitches better. Dust fell from the ceiling. The wooden planks on the ceiling began to sag under its weight. I saw a gap in the ceiling. An eye. Sarah Vance's blue eye was looking at me through the gap. It wasn't on a face, it was in the palm of the monster's hand pressed against the roof. I see you, Sarah's voice giggled. Crack! A long, spindly arm punched through the wooden ceiling, fumbling around to find me. The arm was covered by a plaid shirt sleeve, the shirt Mark Wilson was wearing when he died. I backed up, hitting the liquor cabinet behind me. Empty bottles fell and shattered. I saw the back door of the saloon. That was the only way out. But to reach it, I had to run right under where the fumbling arm was. I had no more time to think. I pulled the Zippo lighter from my pocket. I grabbed a bottle of whiskey with a little left at the bottom of the cabinet. Cheap liquor from the last century, now turned into pure alcohol. I smashed the neck of the bottle, pouring the liquor onto the dry, rotten wooden bar. You want me? I yelled, flicking the lighter. Come and get me. I threw the burning lighter into the puddle of liquor. Whoosh! Flames erupted violently, licking the dry wood as if it were gasoline. The entire bar was engulfed in flames in an instant, creating a wall of fire between me and the collapsing ceiling. The monster shrieked piercingly. It seemed to fear fire. Fire damages skin. Fire burns thread. Taking advantage of the moment it withdrew its arm, I dashed through the sea of fire, kicked open the back door, and ran outside. In front of me was the trail leading down to Red Rock Canyon, where the darkness was even denser than ink. I coughed violently from the smoke, my eyebrows singed, but I was alive. Behind me, the old saloon was blazing fiercely, illuminating the giant silhouette of the Stitcher jumping over the flames, its shadow stretching long on the sand like a scythe of death. It hadn't given up yet. It was furious. And I knew, when it caught me this time, it wouldn't talk anymore. It would tear me apart instantly. I plunged down into the canyon, where its true tailoring workshop awaited. I thought the howling wind in the canyon was due to the terrain, until I realized it was the sound of thousands of mouths simultaneously pleading to be unstitched, echoing from the dark crevices deep within the earth. The deeper I went, the air became thicker and humid, a complete contrast to the dryness of the desert above. The acrid smell of the saloon fire was gradually replaced by another odor, 1,000 times worse. It was the smell of an abandoned slaughterhouse, mixed with the odor of half-burned candle wax and musty old clothes. My shoes slipped on the gravel, creating excessive scraping sounds that echoed. Here, sound didn't dissipate. It bounced back, distorted, as if the rock walls were chewing on my footsteps. I stopped, gasping for breath next to a gigantic cactus bush. When my weak flashlight beam swept across the bush, I almost dropped my gun. It wasn't a cactus. The trunk was bluish-purple, soft, covered in blue veins like blood vessels, and the sharp spines poking out from the trunk. They were needles. Hundreds, thousands of rusted metal sewing needles, of varying lengths, pierced through the inside of the trunk outward. At the tip of each needle, instead of flowers, were tiny, shriveled patches of skin fluttering in the gentle breeze. Nature here was infected. Or worse, it had been modified. I continued on, trying not to touch anything. In front of me was the entrance to the old silver mine, the Silver Queen. The mine door was propped up by rotten timbers, looking like a black, gaping mouth waiting. From inside that mouth the sound of wind howled out. Ooh. Ooh. Unstitch. Us. I turned off my flashlight, pressing myself against the rock face. Darkness enveloped me. I closed my eyes, listening. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a collective moan. The voices of men, women, and children merging into a chorus of torment. And beneath that sound was the noise of machinery operating. Clack, slice, clack, slice. The sound of metal clanging, the sound of scissors cutting fabric. Steady, industrial, cold. I turned my light back on, biting the flashlight in my mouth, both hands gripping the rifle, and entered the mine. The tunnel sloped steeply downward. Traces of human activity, minecart tracks, discarded picks, quickly disappeared. They were replaced by things that were organic. The tunnel wall was no longer cold rock. It was covered with a slimy membrane, pale pink, throbbing with a slow rhythm. I touched the wall. It was warm and wet. I was walking inside the esophagus of some gigantic creature. After about 200 meters, the tunnel opened up into a large cave, the size of a stadium. I hid behind a boulder, or a gigantic fossilized bone, looking down, and the scene before me paralyzed my brain, unable to process it. This was not a cave. This was the workshop. Hundreds of rusted chains hung down from the high cave ceiling, and hanging from those chains were not chandeliers, but people. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of them. They were hung upside down, naked, but they were not dead. I saw their chests still faintly rising and falling. Their skin was marked. Black ink lines were intricately drawn on their bodies, dividing them into sections like a beef map in a butcher shop. Upper thigh, shoulder, back, abdominal muscle. Below the cave floor, dozens of small creatures were moving busily. They were not the giant Stitcher I had met. They were the assistant tailors. They looked like gigantic spiders made of severed human hands, stitched together, 5 or 6 hands combined into one body, moving on their fingers. In the center, where the wrists met, sprouted a long sewing needle. They crawled onto the suspended victims. Slice. One assistant tailor cut a patch of thigh skin from an obese man. The man groaned in pain, but the sound was muffled by his tightly stitched mouth. The monster carried the patch of skin, scuttling toward the center of the cave, where a gigantic stone operating table lay. I squinted toward that table. There was something lying on the table. A massive, incomplete body. It was twice the size of the Stitcher that was chasing me. It looked like a titan being assembled. "Oh my God," I whispered, tears welling up from horror and disgust. "They're building an army." Suddenly, the ground shook violently. Dust and fragments of flesh rained down from the cave ceiling. Crash! The cave entrance behind me was sealed off by a huge falling rock. No, not a falling rock. The Stitcher had arrived. It had caught up with me. But it didn't enter the way I did. It had torn open the cave ceiling to jump down. It landed right in the middle of the cave floor, crushing 2 assistant tailors under its feet. Its body was now even more repulsive after the fire. Patches of skin were scorched, peeling off, revealing red muscle tissue underneath. Pastor Thomas's face was half burned, baring white teeth in an insane grin. "Elias," its voice echoed throughout the cave, resonating with the groans of the victims suspended above. "You have found home." All the assistant tailors stopped working. Hundreds of eyes, real eyes, stitched into the rock wall, simultaneously turned to look at me where I was hiding behind the boulder. I had nowhere left to run. I stood up, stepping out of my hiding place, gripping the rifle, even though I knew it was useless. "So this is your plan?" I yelled, my voice echoing in the putrid space. "To turn humanity into old clothes?" The Stitcher walked toward me. Each of its steps shook the fleshy floor. "Not clothes," it said, tilting its scorched head to one side. "It is unity. You are too fragmented. You waste too much flesh. One person dies, their skin rots. Waste. Here, we utilize everything. We sew up the cracks. We become one." It raised its arm. The arm lengthened, its joints automatically separating and being reconnected by black, sinewy threads. "You will be a beautiful patch, Elias. Your skin is weather-beaten. Very good for an outer shell." It lunged. Its speed was too fast for that gigantic size. I rolled to the side, narrowly dodging its thunderous punch. The punch smashed the rock where I had just been standing, fragments flying into my face, cutting my cheek. I fired. Bang! Bang! I aimed for the stitching lines on its knee joint. If I could cut the thread, it would collapse. The bullet hit its mark. A black thread as thick as a thumb snapped. Its left leg went slack, making it stumble. "Clever," it snarled, showing no sign of pain. "But I have plenty of thread." From its abdomen, dozens of black threads shot out like octopus tentacles, automatically wrapping around the knee, stitching the wound shut in an instant. It violently whipped its long arm across. I didn't have time to dodge. Smack! I was flung away like a rag doll, slamming hard into the slimy wall. I felt my ribs cracking, my lungs stinging as if someone had poured hot lead into them. I coughed up blood, trying to crawl back up. The Stitcher advanced, slowly, savoring the moment. "Do not resist anymore," it whispered. "Pain is just the feeling of being separated. When you are sewn into us, you will not feel pain anymore." My vision was blurry, but I saw something in the corner of the cave. It was the old mine storage. Rotten wooden barrels with skull and crossbones painted on them. Dynamite. This mine was shut down in the 50 seconds, but miners often left leftover explosives because they were too lazy to take them back. After 70 years, the nitroglycerin in the dynamite would seep out, turning into extremely unstable sweat of death. Just a small shock. I glanced at the Stitcher, then at the pile of wooden barrels about 20 meters away. "You're right," I coughed heavily, blood running down my chin. "I'm tired. I want to end it." "Good boy." The monster reached out to grab me. I pulled the hunting knife from my belt, not to attack it. I threw the knife with all my might, not at the monster. I threw it toward the cave wall above the pile of explosives, where an old oil lamp was still hanging precariously on a rotten wooden bracket. "But I don't like sewing," I grinned, a bloody smile. "I like unpicking." The knife plunged into the rotten wooden bracket. Clack! The bracket broke. The oil lamp fell. Time seemed to stand still. I saw the lamp spin in the air, falling straight onto the pile of wooden barrels seeping with the glistening, deadly liquid. The Stitcher turned its head, realizing the danger. For the first time, I saw fear on that patched-up face. "No!" it roared, lunging toward the pile of explosives to stop it. But gravity was faster than it. The lamp hit the barrel. Clink. A tiny spark. And then, the world turned white. The explosion didn't sound immediately. It began with a massive pressure crushing my eardrums, throwing me backward deep into a small tunnel niche behind me. Then the sound arrived. Boom! The entire mountain seemed to be lifted. The cave ceiling collapsed. Thousands of tons of rock crashed down onto the workshop. Chains snapped. The suspended bodies fell like rain. I saw the Stitcher, the mighty monster, swallowed by the flame. Its patched-up body was torn into 1,000 pieces. The stitching threads burst open. Limbs, head, internal organs, all flew everywhere in the firestorm. It was no longer the Unity. It was returned to scattered fragments. I curled up in the small rock niche, covering my head as the rockslide sealed the cave entrance. Darkness descended, thick and suffocating. The explosion ended. Only the sound of falling rocks and the sizzling of burning flesh remained. I lay there, in absolute darkness, buried underground. My ears were ringing, hearing nothing but the faint beat of my own heart. I was alive, but I was buried alive along with the remnants of this nightmare. And in that darkness, my hand touched something soft and wet. I fumbled. It was a hand, a severed hand, half burnt, but its fingers were still twitching. It was lightly scratching my palm. It was looking for a needle. I managed to escape and am driving away from Nevada, but why is the itch on my left wrist starting to take the shape of a cross-stitch line? And why in the rearview mirror do I see my own reflection smiling even though I am crying? They found me 3 days later. The rescue team said it was a miracle. A natural air pocket created by 2 large rocks falling together had shielded me from thousands of tons of earth and stone. They found me severely dehydrated, delirious, and clutching a severed, charred arm as if it were a life raft. They said I was lucky. State police swooped in. The FBI got involved. The explosion was explained as gas buildup in the old mine shaft. The bodies in the cave? Victims of a crazy cult, the press wrote. They found hundreds of human body parts, but no one mentioned the threads, or how those parts had been assembled. The truth was too difficult to swallow, so people chose to believe the more comfortable lie. A serial killer, a sick cult. End of story. I spent 2 weeks in a Las Vegas hospital. 3 broken ribs, bruised lung, multiple soft tissue injuries. But I recovered quickly. Too quickly. My surgeon, Dr. Aris, was amazed. Elias, your self-healing mechanism is phenomenal. The incision on your abdomen, it closed up overnight. I've never seen skin tissue adhere so quickly and neatly. It's as if your body instinctively knew how to close the wound. I just offered a weak smile, but my heart felt cold. I knew what adhere meant. I was discharged on a blazing afternoon. I didn't go back to Oak Haven. That town was dead, even if its people were still living there. I picked up a rental car and drove straight east, away from the desert, away from Red Rock Canyon. I wanted to see rain. I wanted to go somewhere humid, where human skin wouldn't dry and crack, where everything rotted naturally instead of being permanently preserved. I drove continuously for 10 hours. When night fell, I stopped at a miserable motel on an Arizona state highway. The room reeked of stale cigarette smoke and old carpet, but at least it didn't smell of bleach and rotting meat. I threw my bag on the bed, stepping into the bathroom to wash my face. I turned on the faucet. Cold water splashed onto my face, bringing a rare moment of clarity. I looked up at myself in the mirror. My face was haggard, my stubble patchy. My eyes were dark with lack of sleep. But overall, it was still Elias Thorne, still me. Or was it? I felt an intense itch on my left wrist, where I was scraped in the cave when the Stitcher flung me away. I raised my hand to scratch. The itch was not on the surface of the skin, it was under the skin. I looked closely at my wrist under the flickering fluorescent light. The scar had healed, forming a faint pink line. But something was moving underneath that scar. It looked like a small worm wriggling. My heart pounded. I held my breath, pressing my fingernail hard onto the scar. Pop. The scar burst open. No blood flowed out. Instead, a sharp black tip emerged. I clamped it with my fingernails and pulled. It lengthened, tenacious. It was a thread, not a surgeon's suture. This was the black, coarse kind, soaked in a yellowish goo, the fluid I had seen dripping from Sarah Vance. I pulled out about 5 centimeters of the thread. The pain felt not like a cut, but like someone was pulling out my nerve. I frantically looked at my chest, where my ribs were broken. I tore open my shirt. On my chest, the bruises were gone. Instead, there was a dense network of blue-black veins under the skin. They didn't follow the circulatory system. They ran in geometric patterns. Zigzags, X-shaped stitches. My body was sewing itself back together from the inside. I stumbled back, hitting the sink. Memories flooded back. In the darkness of the mine, when I was buried, that severed hand, it had touched me. It had scratched my palm. It wasn't looking for a needle. It was transmitting a needle. The stitcher wasn't a specific creature. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't the giant in the cave. It was an idea, a contagion, an ancient curse that existed in the form of repair. It believed that humans were flawed, fragile creations, and it wanted to reinforce us. And I, the sole survivor, was the new host. No, I moaned, grabbing the razor from the shelf. I'll cut you out. I'll pull you out. I raised the blade to my wrist, about to slice down. But my right hand, the hand holding the razor, suddenly went rigid. It no longer obeyed my brain's command. My fingers automatically stretched out, dropping the razor into the sink. Clink. Then, my right hand slowly raised, touching my left cheek. A gesture of affection that was utterly horrifying. I looked in the mirror. The face in the mirror was no longer afraid. The corner of my mouth began to turn up. Not because I was smiling. An invisible force beneath the facial skin was pulling my mouth muscles up. It stretched and stretched until the smile reached the limit of pain. In my head, a voice echoed, not Sarah's voice, nor Pastor Thomas's. It was my own voice, but deeper, colder, and resonating like clashing metal. Don't resist, Elias. This skin of yours is very durable. We can go very far with this suit. I tried to scream, but my throat tightened. My vocal cords were being tied tighter. I realized the horrifying truth. I didn't escape the canyon. I brought the canyon with me. I was the Noah's Ark carrying the seeds of destruction to the civilized world. I will go to the big cities. I will shake everyone's hand. I will fix them. In the mirror, I saw my left eye twitch, but I didn't blink. From the corner of my left eye, a sharp needle tip slowly poked through, carrying a bloody black thread. I, or the thing I was becoming, smiled at the reflection. I reached for my jacket. I needed to keep going. There are so many people out there who are broken. There are so many wounds that need to be sewn up. And you, the one listening to this story, do you feel a slight itch at the back of your neck? Right below your hairline? Don't scratch. If you scratch, you might find a thread end. And once you find it, we will know where you are. You've just finished listening to the story, and maybe you're thinking it's just fiction, but please, put your hand up and check the back of your neck. Does it feel a little itchy? Do you see a small thread bulging under your skin? Elias Thorne is still looking for new patches, and maybe he is very close to your city. If you want to be warned when the tailors get close, click subscribe and turn on notifications immediately. Don't forget to leave a like if you want to keep your skin intact tonight. Comment below. I'm fine to check in if you haven't found any thread on your body. I am the Weaver of Nightmares. Sleep tight and never scratch.